go ahead and let's get started. My name is Sean O'Connor. I'm the general manager at the Alligator. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to be discussing some events that occurred 50 years ago that ultimately led to our independence. The Alligator's over 115 years old, and this is one of the most noted stories and one of our defining moments in our journey. Before we get started, some of the housekeeping notes. Tonight's discussion's being recorded. It'll be available to you after the event. You'll receive a link sent via email that you can then share and view at that point. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end. You can submit questions through Zoom using the Q&A button. Please do so. We'd like to hear what you would like to know more about. We'll try to get to everything at the end, but we may not have time, but we'll do our best to answer all the questions that you may have. Moderating our discussion tonight is Professor Mike Foley. Professor Foley joined the UF faculty in 2003 as a master lecturer in journalism after 3 decades at the St. Petersburg Times. He's an honors graduate of UF and was selected to the Distinguished Alumnus, which is now the Hall of Fame, and has been, and that was in 1994. He's going to be moderating the event. And with that, I will hand this over to Mike Foley, and he will introduce Ron and Jean.
Hello, all of you. I have a confession to make at the very beginning. I graduated a year before this happened, so I only got to read about it. So I'm very interested in the discussion tonight. And I also have a confession to make. Though it is widely assumed that I did, I never worked for the Alligator. My first story I wrote for reporting was published in the Alligator, and God knows I'm glad it went down with the old Alligator building, because kids would make fun of it. It was on the wall. So now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleagues. Jean C. Chance is an emeritus professor of journalism at the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications and a former chairwoman of the Hearst Awards Committee. She is a UF Hall of Fame and independent Florida Alligator Hall of Fame inductee and former chairwoman of the Campus Communications Board. Before becoming a member of UF faculty, Chance was a UF student, Alligator staffer, and reporter for multiple Florida news outlets, and a friend of mine for many, many years. Ron, a native Floridian, Ron Sachs is a 1972 graduate of the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications. His award-winning newspaper, magazine, and television media career was punctuated by his service to 2 Florida governors, Reuben Askew and Lawton Chiles, as senior media counsel. Since 1996, he has owned Tallahassee-based Sachs Media, consistently ranked among the nation's top 100 independent firms in the industry, and he is a mover and shaker in the state capitol. Proud of you, proud of you, proud of you. Let's get started. I think a good place to begin was an outline. I knew the Alligator when it was in the student union. Maybe we could describe that situation and then move on to the big change.
Well, you know, my undergrad years were 68 to 72. I was editor in the fall of 71 through the spring of 72. And we were quartered in the Wright Student Union, and we received a portion of students' activity fees to help fund the Alligator. Obviously, advertising also helped our revenues, and the newspaper was distributed free in boxes in front of every campus building Monday through Friday. And for many students back then, it was their sole source of information on a regular basis, because many couldn't afford cable TV or a newspaper subscription. So we had wire services and provided lots of information that was not just local, but state, national, and global in capsule form. And again, that we received student fees to help fund the Alligator, helped us provide it free 5 days a week.
Gene, what was the journalism department's relationship with the Alligator at that time?
I think you'd have to figure out which professor you would ask that question of. Many professors, and I would say myself included, kind of resented the fact that you didn't see many of the journalism kids who also were at the Alligator, because they rarely came to class. And you let it go. Now, Ron was never one of my students. I will excuse him from the list of non-attenders. But there were certainly faculty members who liked to use the Alligator as a point of some ridicule in class. Every now and then we would probably say something about misspelled words or bad grammar. In his day, Buddy Davis was really pretty tough on fact errors. And yes, there was a crown of thorns program in his classes. But all in all, I would think the more professional members of the journalism faculty respected the time the kids put in. There were behind the scenes relationships where we would try to give some advice if asked. But we definitely had some disagreements about the independence issue, and Ron will get into that. But, you know, I've always had great respect from the Alligator. It goes back to my undergrad days, and we were in what was not the rights union, but just the student union, which is now, I think, Dower Hall, and we were in the basement. And we did not have a very good relationship with student government, but we did take the money from the student activity fees. So that's kind of where we were.
You know, Mike, I would add that while we were funded somewhat from student activity fees and advertising and student publications, Ed Barber did a marvelous job running it then and even after this saga that is going to be unpacked tonight. But it was an exciting time. You think about what was going on in the country, particularly for the young folks listening tonight, 68 to 72. I mean, the anti-Vietnam War movement is taking root all over the country. The civil rights movement is in full bloom. The women's movement is just kind of getting some head of steam. The environmental movement almost like was invented. And the real education back then was not necessarily in the classroom, but in the Plaza of the Americas, where every single day there were presentations about these issues. It was almost like a social issues laboratory. But I'll say this, the College of Journalism, for those of us who worked at the Alligator and were JM students, we believed what we were being taught, and we were practicing it at the Alligator. And if we missed classes, it was because it was more exciting to be writing real stories about real things than, you know, my JM professor who had a tip sheet you had to sign up for, and covering a murder my junior year. I got overdue books at the library as my story. So covering something like a murder over overdue books at the library, murder wins.
It's still that way to a certain extent. That if an Alligator staffer has an assignment, they will send me a note. They're polite enough to send me a note saying, I'm not going to be in class today. But I think that's good. That's good. And then speaking of the Plaza of the Americas in the late 60s, you could walk through the Plaza of the America and get stoned, get a contact high. It was just the way it was in the late 70s. So I spent a lot of time there. Tell me, just do me a favor, Ron, and set the scene. Describe the newsroom at the Alligator in the late 60s.
It's a pretty tight and intimate space. I'll tell one quick anecdote unrelated to the main story we're talking about tonight. As editor, back then we were paste up the pages with wax, on tilted boards. And the production people, my job was to come in every night and proofread the paper, including the ads. I really didn't read the ads ever, and I got in trouble my editor early term because the Bench and Bar was a local pub that catered to law students, and they showed movies on the wall every night. And the headline on the ad was supposed to be "Free Flicks" with capital F-L-I-C-K-S. The paste up artist decided to see, hey, can I make the L and the I run together to form a U? And so the headline on the 4-page ad was not Free Flicks, and my first dust up with President O'Connell was doing for that ad appearing with me. So I excused myself by saying I had done a poor job of proofreading, but let me just say that damn Bench and Bar was packed that
night. Oh man, that's a great story. That's a great story. All right, let's talk about let's set the scene politically. You touched on the cultural scene, but let's set the scene politically on campus vis-a-vis the administration versus the Alligator.
Well, as is I think common to the history of the Alligator, back then and even today, our job is to report the news, the facts and truth, and sometimes to challenge the administration. So if we were in DC covering, national government, we'd be challenging what's going on with the facts and the truth. If there's a controversial issue. So too, as the student newspaper, we thought it was important to cover UF news, but also to cover other news. So because we were on the campus in the Rights Union, we had a faculty advisor in-house, and it was Alan Whiteleather. That was his name. I remember 50 years later. And he would review copy and tell you, you should edit this and change that. And he's a little bit central to the early part of the abortion freedom of press part of this saga.
All right, well, let's get into the meat of it today. How did this all start? How did this happen?
So I guess for the audience, what you need to know is we're in a period of time right now, great political divide. And the abortion issue, the pendulum has swung way back to the political right. Whatever your politics are, that's the facts and the truth of what's happening in the country and in the state today. Well, back when I was editor in the fall of '71, we were still under the thumb of an 1868 passed abortion law, right after the Civil War. And it was one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. Women did not have a right to choose freely. So we decided to do a story or a set of stories about women who had legal abortions in other states and women who had dangerous and likely illegal abortions in Florida, where it was largely prohibited in almost every case under a 103-year-old Florida law. So we got the stories, and I thought it would be good to have a sidebar piece of art that had a list of clinics and counseling services, legal stuff. And John Parker, great columnist for the Alligator back then, was a law student. And so he sees the list that we put together, and he says to me, Ronnie, if you publish that, you're committing a felony. I said, oh, that just can't be right. And he shows me the statute, 797.02, passed in 1868, that says you cannot knowingly advertise, print, publish, even hints where someone could go to get an abortion. Well, at the College of Journalism, we're looking at all the things we're learning, that Congress and the states shall pass no law that abridges the First Amendment and freedom of the press. And right here, we're up against a 103-year-old Florida law we didn't know even existed. We wanted to publish the list before we knew it was illegal. Once we knew it was illegal, we absolutely thought we had to challenge it. So that's kind of the setup.
Got it. You thought you were going to go to jail.
Well, Alan Whiteleather told me he could not allow us to publish it because he's a faculty member and he was kind of afraid of probably his employment and all that. And, letting the staff you're supposed to supervise commit an intentional felony, probably not a good idea for your career, So at the time, all the student publications, the yearbook, the literary journal, and the Alligator were under an umbrella of the Board of Student Publications, an organization that was populated by a board that was like 4 faculty, 4 students, and the late Jack Detweiler, the great Jack Detweiler, was the chairman. So this issue was submitted to the Board of Student Publications for review. Is that correct, Jean?
Right.
And so we decided, we'll leave our fate up to, can we publish this list or not? And I went to the meeting of the board, and God bless the faculty member who did not show for the meeting. So the students had a 4-3 advantage there, but the students are not all, like socially conscious, early 70s folks. One was a tri-delt, as I recall, who, not to overly stereotype, but not automatically a bastion of liberal thought, you think. And the students voted 4-3 for publication. And if they had voted 4-3 against publication, we would have lived with it. But then I get a call from former President Stephen C. O'Connell, who himself is a Gator and former student body president, to meet him for a Coke at the student union. So I did. And he said to me, I overruled the Board of Student Publications and you cannot publish this. And I'm thinking, this isn't right. How can you do that? We went through the process that the university established and we prevailed. We should be allowed to publish. But his thinking, I'll speak for him because he's been passed for a long time, was he cannot allow, as a former state Supreme Court Chief Justice and university president, and technically publisher of the paper to commit what appears to be an actual felony. So he said no. And that's when the saga began that involved Professor Chance and her former husband, Chuck Chance. How would you like to trust your first possible felony to a guy's name is Chance. And so what happened was our publisher, our printer in Ocala refused to print this, thinking he might be culpable under it. So we had a meeting over at Gene's house back then in October of 1971. And when our printer wouldn't print it, we had a big white space on the front page that explained why this space is blank. And it took a few days to actually get it into the paper. But Gene, the gathering at your house that you were kind to host was lots of folks helping decide whether or not we were going to actually do this. You want to share
Talk about that, Gene. What was it like?
It was like the end of the world. We are living in the Department of Journalism headquarters in the West Wall of the stadium. John Paul Jones, the late Paul Jones, was Ray Weimer had been the director. He was succeeded by John Paul Jones. It might have been a little bit different had Ray Weimer been the director. He was a professional journalist. Class time change. This young kid comes up. He looks like he's about 12 years old. And he said, Professor Chance. Well, I had not been teaching very long. And it's just nice to have somebody, instead of saying, hey, you, said Professor Chance. So I stopped and he said, my name is Ron Sachs. I'm editor of the Alligator. I said, well, I recognize your name. He said, I need to ask you, talk to you. And I said, well, come on in the office, which probably was a terrible mistake. I had at one point during all of this saga been warned that not to worry about my involvement with the students at the Alligator, just not to worry about promotion or tenure. And I had said it hadn't crossed my mind, which it was true, it really hadn't. Ron explained what they wanted to publish, and I saw First Amendment all over the place. And we talked about what I thought the problems politically would be. You were talking about an issue that was very sensitive to a man not just that had been Supreme Court Chief Justice, was a legendary alum, tough on students as a president. And he was Catholic. We had a state attorney who was Catholic. And I said, I think you will have problems with the legislature not wanting the president of the University of Florida, who by law is answerable to the legislature. It's a controversial issue in the state. It has a religious overtone. And then there's the Florida statute that says it's a felony if you publish or cause to be published. And so next, I don't even remember how these kids ended up in my living room, but they did. Ron can tell you.
I remember, Gene, that you said if you want to come over to our house tonight to talk to you and your smart lawyer husband, a future judge. And I invited Steve Ufelder, the former student body president, a very dear friend even to this day, Don Middlebrooks, who was the current student body president at the time, and now a wonderful federal judge in South Florida who may be watching this tonight, and a couple others from the Alligator staff. And we gathered, as I recall, in your kitchen, leaning against the kitchen counters and chit-chatting about this felony and this state statute, 103 years old, that stomped all over the First Amendment. And
John Parker, don't forget John Parker.
And in our view, as important as women's rights were, if the First Amendment did not apply to this situation, there were no women's rights. So the priority issue here was the First Amendment, not abortion rights, although it's been painted lots of different ways. and we talked it out pretty well. And God bless the folks in that room who all advised me against committing the felony. Because,
right.
I would be the responsible or irresponsible party, depending on your perspective. And I think they were loving on me and looking out for me with that advice and counsel. But I knew in Jean's heart, she knew it was a law that was antiquated. It might have made sense in 1868, but things are different in 1971 and in 2021, 50 years later. So I listened to their counsel and I told them, thank you, but I think we're going to do this anyway. This has to be challenged. And
And that's when I said I would give you a dime, because the phone calls had gone up from a nickel to a dime, because you're going to need a lawyer. And I said, if you want to get somebody else to tell you what the law said, because John Parker, I think, was one who said, go for it. And I said, you're listening to a law student.
Yeah.
I'll give you a dime, and then let me go and wake up the lawyer who's upstairs and take a little bit more advice. And
So,
that's he got
You
it.
you didn't publish this in the newspaper. You,
well,
Well,
we had to fly it. I'll explain. Our publisher, as I mentioned earlier, refused to print it when he read the story he was about to print in Ocala, that we were kind of intentionally violating a law. And he called me up and said, I can't do this. I said, well, let me, give you a copy to put in a boxed white block on the front page. And we did that. Then we had the meeting at Jean and Chuck's house, and Don Middlebrooks, student body president at the time, who, we covered student government with, kind of mostly a healthy arm's length. But, back in those days, student government was very socially conscious, just like the Alligator and everybody else. And it probably, it wasn't like a fight between student government and the Alligator. It was pretty reasonable relationship. But Don knew we couldn't print it. And so he said, we had the mocked up list of the counseling services and clinics, and I signed the bottom of it. And he paid $200 out of his own pocket to mimeograph the list on the student government mimeo machine. Okay,
explain what a mimeograph is to the
let's call it an early version of a Xerox or copy, but very slow, and it makes a noise. John Parker later wrote about
pocket
up. And so we printed 22,000 copies of the list, and to this day, Judge Middlebrooks, a very dear friend, terrific federal judge, will not allow me to repay him for the $200 he laid out of his own pocket for the paper and the ink. And I went to the Alligator newsroom with the 22,000 copies. I know it wasn't a democracy. I said to the staff, if we do this, and I think we should do it, we are committing technically a felony, legally a felony. I signed my name to the list so none of you can get in as much trouble. But I'm not going to ask you to participate in this unless you really think it's the right thing to do. So we put it to a vote. I was fairly confident with the, enthusiastic journalism coursing through all our veins and what we're learning at the CJC. So it was kind of a unanimous vote to do it. And so the coolest thing was everybody took a bunch of them and skulked about campus pre-dawn. And when the paper was delivered to the boxes, open the paper, shove in a slip that has the list and my signature. And so that morning when dawn broke, Chuck Chance, who was my lawyer, Jean's husband, let me know that there was an information out for my arrest for this felony from the state attorney's office, and told me that they could come down and arrest me in the Alligator newsroom. And I thought that would be a ridiculous melodramatic scene. So I told him, I'll just come to your office and let's just turn myself in. So I did that, and then felt the very uncomfortable feeling a defendant or accused has on a perp walk, walking from Chuck's office to the jail to be booked and fingerprinted and mugshot. And then I was told that President O'Connell wanted me to appear at a news conference he was holding at Tigard Hall. Because, by the way, I guess what I left out, once we made the decision to print, I called him at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I said, President O'Connell, remember, this is landline time. I just want to tell you, I apologize for calling so late, but I've made a decision with our team that we are going to respectfully disobey your order not to publish, and we're going to publish this list tomorrow. And said good night, and we did it. So I was arrested and fingerprinted and released on my own recognizance, having lived in Gainesville for 4 years. And then Fletcher Baldwin, great con law professor from the UF Law School, joined with Chuck in my defense. My parents got all sorts of terrible hate mail in the days where it was easy to find someone's home address, calling me the devil and stuff like that. There were threats and all sorts. My mother was not accustomed to being interviewed and told the Miami News, now a defunct newspaper reporter, that if I were convicted and faced a year in prison, she would put her head in the oven, which is a Jewish mother's reference to just killing herself. So it was going sideways. But so October was the arrest, December was the trial. And it was pretty high stakes. It became national news because it was significant for a college newspaper to be committing a felony against the 103-year-old law. And the trial was the next big thing, except that at his news conference, when President O'Connell put his arm around me and squeezed me, I would say not in a loving way, a disciplinarian way. And the basic message he had at the news conference was, I told Ronnie not to do this, and that if I were convicted of this felony, I would certainly be fired as editor of the Alligator. And I think it was expelled from school. But then he also said he was going to request an opinion from the Attorney General of Florida about whether he, as technical publisher of a state organ, could exercise prior restraint, pre-publication censorship of something intended to go in the student newspaper. And he sent that request and set up and again, it's only an advisory opinion, but if that opinion came back in the affirmative, that yes, you can exercise prior restraint, that I would be fired as editor and suspended. So I was feeling like I was facing a double jeopardy as a 21-year-old kid from Miami, looking forward to a career in news. And I'll just say that before the trial, America's favorite lawyer today, Barry Richard with the Greenberg Charter Law Firm, was a young assistant attorney general. I hug him every time I see him on the street in Gainesville. He wrote the opinion for then Attorney General Bob Shevin that essentially said to President O'Connell, no, you cannot exercise prior restraint. And that opinion reverberated not just across campus newspapers in Florida, but all across the country, though it had no force of law. And then the trial happened a year ago, 50 years ago next week. And Mike, we can go into that if and when you're ready.
Sure. Absolutely. Talk about the trial. You turned yourself in to be arrested. You thought you were going to be arrested. You had a succession plan for the Alligator for somebody to take your place if you were in jail.
Well, I thought about going to Canada for a while, but it just didn't right for me. Didn't have a passport. No, Gary Grunder was the managing editor. I removed myself from any responsibility or authority or judgment in coverage by the Alligator of my arrest in this saga. That seemed like the right thing to do, to not have a conflict of interest. John Parker wrote a number of columns. Gary Grunder ran the paper's coverage of this pretty well. But, we basically, beat the president, former state Supreme Court Chief Justice, with the Attorney General's opinion. Then we're going into a court of law to face the felony charge. And I was brilliantly represented by Jean's husband at the time, Chuck Chance, and Fletcher Baldwin, brilliant constitutional law professor. The presiding judge was Ben Montench. And for you rock and roll fans, Ben Montench was the father of Ben Montench Jr., who was a founding member of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, the greatest rock and roll group ever to come from Gainesville. So Chuck and Fletcher argue passionately about the unconstitutionality of the 1868 103-year-old at the time anti-abortion information law. And Judge Tench listens to all the arguments from the state and from them. And again, I could have done a year in prison. And at some point, bangs the gavel and says he's declaring it unconstitutional. It's huge. Then Fletcher and Chuck walked over to the defendant table where I'm sitting and said, hey, do you mind while we're here if we take a shot at the parent abortion law itself, the very restrictive 1868 abortion law that was part of that entire package? I said, go for it. I'm not. And they went and they argued about its unconstitutionality through the lens of 1971 compared to the cultural and legal landscape of 1868. Judge Tench hits the gavel again and declares Florida's basic 103-year-old ancient, totally prohibitive abortion law, in only the rarest of occasions could a woman get an abortion, unconstitutional. And that was the lightning rod. that caused the state to have to rewrite the abortion law. I wouldn't say they made it the most liberal in the country. They made it a little more in 1971. So, you know, the Alligator took on this archaic law that stepped all over the First Amendment when it seemed okay to do it. Once we learned about it, we decided it's not okay to do it ever. And so of all the things in my life and career, I'm proud of our staff back then. Tom Kennedy, our photographer, went on to be the chief photographer for National Geographic. But the people who came after us, we can talk about the fallout, because President O'Connell was so upset by me being found not guilty, the law being found unconstitutional. Others may color the history some way. We're pretty sure he set out to just kill the alligator, all right?
Right.
Others will say that he intended to give it life as independent. I think he nurtured it with a not token, a nice little advertising contract for a year or so. But it's the people who came after me and the staffs that came after our staff. Randy Bellows, who, you know, went on to be a judge. And Ed Barber is a great big hero in all of this, because as the head of, you know, the Alligator and the Board of Student Publications, campus publications, he kept the Alligator alive in very difficult times. But the most important college newspaper in the country throughout its history became more important when it won its independence. It's not like we were asking for independence, but it was dealt to us as a consequence, not a reward, for beating the president on this felony thing. And
He wanted you to go off campus in hopes that you would shrivel and die, like apparently the FSU newspaper at the time did.
Listen, I would say God bless him and those who provided a advertising contract to keep the paper alive during the transition. But again, I can't imagine. I went on to work at the Miami Herald, the challenges left behind by the fallout from what we did. But I think it was good trouble for us to get into. And it was the right thing to do. And frankly, if we did not do that, we would have been basically wasting our tuition money and what we were learning at the College of Journalism.
You're absolutely right. So the hot button obviously was the abortion information, but the real issue was power. How much power the Alligator had, how much power O'Connell had. And he was determined to win.
I will say this, he certainly lived in Tallahassee for a lot of years when I moved up here in 1990. And whenever I saw him, we'd cross the street to greet each other and kind of have a nice hug it out. Another irony would be that Hugh Cunningham, who was a really terrific college journalism professor, went to work at Tigard Hall. He's kind of like the PR machine guy for President O'Connell. And I think I went to a Alligator or College of Journalism banquet many years ago where Hugh got up there and kind of, I think, rewrote history a little bit about it. So I want to set the record straight. I think it was the intent of the administration to kill the Alligator, not to give it independence to survive.
Right.
And God bless all the staffs and Ed Barb and all the folks who have worked to keep it financially viable, notwithstanding the horrible challenges newspapers have today.
Right. Gene, what was it like at home during that trial, during the prep for the trial? And one other thing I want to ask, did either of your lawyers get paid?
There was a modest defense fund generated by the Miami Herald that I had interned at and you know, offered to hire me post-graduation despite the felony charge. You know? And I think it was like something like $5,000. They certainly didn't cover their time. But yes, they were modestly compensated.
What was it like at home during this time?
Well,
and in the college?
Oh, in the college, it was on fire. And there's a list of people, kind of the behind the scenes people. And I would have to say, certainly add to what you've heard about Ed Barber already. There was Judy Barber, his wife, his late wife. And there were times when it was very difficult for the Alligator. We did little things in the college, some of us, to let kids come and use. He finally switched from manual typewriters to electric typewriters in our reporting lab. And the reporting labs got electric typewriters before the faculty, I have to say that. But it was a good thing. And we were helping them the reporters who needed access from the Alligator, we would let them come in, and if we had to unlock some doors, we unlocked some doors. That was not a popular thing with some of the other faculty members, but we helped in little ways. But it was a very difficult time financially, even with the equipment provision and advertising. But people like Jack Detweiler, who really did risk, I don't know if I really had tenure and promotion issues that early in my career, but there were rumbles. But considering there was so much history going on beyond the campus, but within the campus, and it was just so unbelievable to some of us that we were not supporting an issue that was just rock bottom foundation of at least what we thought the journalism department was about. And for the Gainesville Sun, for example, whose editorial writer was a member of, he was one of our colleagues, he was one of my mentors. And for him not to see this through that lens of First Amendment.
Well, Gene, if I could add to this, I had Buddy Davis, Orange G. Buddy Davis, every single year of my 4 years at the University of Florida. Toughest course was editorial writing with him. I loved him, I respect him, I admired him. And when we were getting ready to do this, Gene is who I sought the most counsel from, but I went to see him because I so respected and admired him. And he said to me, as Professor Davis, yes, Ron, this law is ripe for challenging and picking. I told him what we were planning to do. And then once we did it, as the Gainesville Sun editorial writer, he wrote an editorial that just cut my heart out, criticizing me personally for doing something that he told me was right to do. And later he said to me, I didn't say it was right for you to do. And I, when the bloom comes off the rose of one of your idols, it's probably a healthy thing to know that you've grown up and to know that everybody has some flaws and frailties. But, I was talking to Professor Davis. I didn't know I was going to be betrayed by editorialist Davis. And I told him that to his face. And I'm just saying to you, I credit the College of Journalism at the University of Florida and the Alligator dually with anything that's happened in my career. I was learning at the college and I was practicing at the Alligator. And that combination has been a part of everything I've ever done as a communicator. And I owe whatever I've become to that background, not one or the other, both of them.
How come you never told me that Buddy Davis story? Wow, I knew I'd learned something tonight. Wow.
Listen, I loved him still, and I was sad when he passed. I was sad when you passed, but I'll just tell you, when you become a company man, like you did at Tigard Hall to defend the president's actions, you kind of passed your journalism roots. So I own a 25-year-old plus public relations company, integrated marketing communications firm. And what I consider is that we're in the private practice of journalism, right? We get hired to help tell your story, whether you're a public entity or a private entity or not for profit. I'm proud of a lot of the work we've done. And a lot of it is inspired by the kind of work we did at the Alligator. Why this may be the celebrated almost felony crime committed by the Alligator, but we fought the law and the law lost. It's the other stories that have been covered over the more than 100 years of the Alligator that I'm even more proud of. And it's not just during my tenure, but challenging authority when it's right to do that, challenging bad decisions as has happened in recent era on the campus with First Amendment issues, challenging racist policies at a Tom Sawyer motel in my era, challenging the explanation of a suicide in a jailhouse death that the sheriff's office said was a suicide, but the Alligator fairly well proved it was probably murder, and it was. So it's those stories, it's that ongoing mission that makes the Alligator not a make-believe sandbox for students. They're real life journalists practicing journalism right now. And I hope the college and the Alligator forge a deeper, closer relationship, notwithstanding some of the new era things like Fresh Take Florida, because the Alligator's too big, has got too big a history to erode in any way.
We're going to wrap this up pretty soon to get to the questions and answers, but it's obvious what the effect on the Alligator of all this was. What was the national take? Did it reach beyond Gainesville, reach beyond North Central Florida? Did it strike a blow for college newspapers?
Well, I mean, when the Attorney General's decision came out, that letter, there's, again, not the force of law, just an opinion. And then we won in court. It became a national story, and it became quite a buzz among campus newspapers. We were not, we weren't Southern California, which, kind of gave birth to the movements of that era. But in Gainesville, for God's sakes, Hogtown, right? We were learning as much on the Plaza of the Americas as we were in the classroom. But the Alligator, when you think about all the sources of information today, for many students, it was their only source of information. And I'm so proud that an editorial cartoonist who worked for us then, Bill Day, is now one of the most decorated editorial cartoonists in the country. And he basically reflected on lots of what was happening during the time with his cartoons and has gone into a celebrated career. So many great journalists have come from the ranks of the College of Journalism and the Alligator. And journalism lives healthy in Florida and beyond today because these two institutions have had a large role in preparing generations of journalists.
All right, I think that I learned a lot tonight too, Gene. I always do from Ronnie, and it was beautifully told by both of you. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to turn the program over to the current editor-in-chief of the Alligator, Stephen Walker, and we're going to talk about question answers. So we're available. Ask away.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Stephen. I'm, like Professor Foley said, I'm the current editor-in-chief of the Alligator, and I've been tracking some of the questions that you guys have. So I can get started here. When you first, when this was all happening, you mentioned briefly independence for the paper was not on the forefront of your thought process, but that was uncharted in terms of being independent from the university. So I would say did you think that was potentially an option, and how was the early days and months and time after it happened? How was that?
Well, I became editor in the fall of '71, committed the crime in early October by publishing the list. The trial was in December. The next term, we were on trimesters then, I believe. I was editor until the end of the early 1972 trimester, and then I believe Gary Grunder succeeded me. But it took a while for the university to set up the separation, and they set it up with, I basically would call it a nurturing of a modestly nice advertising contract for university announcements, since it was the organ that communicated to students. But I really believe that support was short-lived intentionally, and it was people like Randy Bellows and Ed Barber in particular, who in those early days made independence work, hard as it was to get an off-campus facility before having a place that used to be on University Avenue. It was difficult. But Stephen, more specifically, no, we didn't go into saying we want to be independent. We didn't know we needed to be independent to fight for the First Amendment at a newspaper, even a college newspaper. And I would just say every single member of our staff believed we were real journalists. And to this day, that's the truth for today's staff too.
Right. One question asks, do you wish you had done anything differently looking in hindsight?
I wish I had told my mother not to talk to the press. I wish I'd done that. I wish I had dressed better the day I was, getting grabbed by President O'Connell. I was wearing an Alligator shirt, and but it just happened as it happened. And I think we absolutely did the right thing. And I do remember, back then, way before the internet and email, snail mail still mattered. And my parents got so much hate mail in Miami. I mean, just ugly stuff, mean, dangerous almost. Today you'd call police about it. And then there was a women's group on campus that I recall put out a statement that said that I and the Alligator cared more about the First Amendment than women's rights. And it was so incongruent to what was happening. If the Alligator and the First Amendment could not publish legal information about where women could get help, then women's rights were infringed upon intentionally. So I think it was a teaching moment for lots of folks on the campus about how important the First Amendment was to shining a light on the facts and the truth about lots of issues, including women's rights.
Right. This is a question for the whole panel. What do you see as like the biggest priorities in journalism? Obviously, like the battle with the First Amendment and like protecting that is like the overarching one, but like maybe ones that people don't exactly think about all the time.
I would think that what the problem facing journalism today is money, advertising problems, and misinformation. Trying for a former president cast such a doubt on the news media, the mainstream news media, that getting credibility back is just difficult, really hard. I don't have a solution, but except to do your job every day, but it's getting harder and harder to do with fewer and fewer dollars.
Well, I would say this, Professor Foley and Stephen and Jean, I think the financial challenges faced by newspapers are really a great threat. The hard copy newspaper is probably a dinosaur walking around on its last legs. It's all digital. It can be updated around the clock. Newspapers used to save their best story for the morning edition. They know better than to do that now. But I'll also say this, and maybe it's my age. I'm 71, pretty young 71 by remaining emotionally immature on a lot of fun. But if I, as a young Miami Herald reporter in the early 70s, if Twitter existed then, and I tweeted out an opinion about a city commission meeting I was covering and opined about some agenda item, I should have been suspended or fired. And the casual comfort that journalists have today, tweeting out their opinions on stories they're covering, it's atrocious, and it only contributes to the ability of folks who attack legacy media to say it's biased, it's left-leaning. I mean, we all have opinions about stories we covered in our career, those of us who are older, but we never express them publicly. And the fact that Twitter has unleashed the floodgates for journalists to personally express opinions on things they're covering or people they're covering, beats they're covering, it is the single biggest cause, in my opinion, of the erosion of trust in the press.
Good point.
I don't disagree. I do think from a faculty perspective, I would hope that today's, at least journalism faculty, really expect the students to be student journalists. I guess if there was a mantra that I always began a new semester with, it was, you are not just a University of Florida student. You are a University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications student journalist. And I wanted them to get Alligator experience. If that was their goal in life, or they had a career challenge, that was first and foremost.
I'll also say this to the current era students who may be participating in this program tonight. Please embrace the responsibility and the honor to be a journalist. Even if you end up evolving into something else, like I did, working for 2 governors and all that, because I love politics, it's important. You know, the who, what, when, where, why, and how still matter. The facts and the truth still matter. And we're in the most dangerous time in the attack on major institutions, including a free press. And we need strong, smart, young, dedicated people working those fields. I'll just say to you, you know, we celebrate that the Gators beat FSU to get a 6-6 season. Every year is a championship season for the College of Journalism at the University of Florida and the Independent Florida Alligator. Every year.
Cool. So one question asks if you still read the Alligator and how it's changed the most. I guess your thoughts on current coverage that's happening, how things have changed, or maybe how things have stayed the same.
I would think Mike and Gene might have a better view on that being there geographically.
Well, I think the Alligator's more in depth than ever.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately it's down to one published paper a week, which is just awful. I subscribe to the news service and I get these terrific stories. I'm really just so proud of the students. It's much more serious when it has to be. It's student run when it has to be, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's as professional as I've ever seen it.
I think this particular semester has been very strong.
Yep.
I can pick up the print copy at whatever Publix I happen to be in, but I read it online. And this, I don't think any of us have any idea what these students have done through COVID to keep this newsroom active, even from bedrooms and couches, and they've just done a wonderful professional job from a distance.
What we're doing is complimenting you, Steve. Good job.
Yep.
I'm incredibly proud of the work that our staff has done this semester, as we actually wrap up the semester, which is sad. So we have a bunch of questions. There's no way I'm going to be able to get to them all, but
Let's do a lightning round, short answers to short questions.
Okay.
there's one that asks, did the paper becoming independent, has it strengthened or weakened the Alligator? How and why? I think I know the answer, but because I'm experiencing it right now. But
I think it strengthened it to the extent that it can challenge authorities when it's appropriate to do so without any fear of direct repercussions like when we were under the thumb. But I think it's challenging because fiscal stability is important for a legacy newspaper, and the Alligator is no different.
I think what's really been a great help, and may not be a permanent one, I certainly hope somehow it could survive, is a very, very lucrative grant that former Dean Diane McFarland arranged. And you just have to almost say this is a day at a time to survive financially, added to what Ron has.
okay. Do you see any parallels in what happened 50 years ago to things happening on the university side with the administration today?
Well, I live in the capital city here. My business is 2 blocks from the Capitol, and I'm a B, not a D, as in terms of a business. But I'll just say to you that the university is supposed to be a place of free thought, where ideas can be shared and academic freedom. And a university president should not live in fear of repercussions from an elected official, unless keeping the job is more important than doing the job right.
Well said.
And the fact that the protest, the backlash about the president's really shallow, bad decision caused him to do a 180 shows that it's relevant to raise your voice at the Alligator, in the student body, at the faculty. And that's the tradition of the Alligator, raise hell and report the news.
Absolutely.
I was pleased, Stephen, to see that the retired faculty did speak out and petition President Fox. Not the city.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, with things that are happening right now, I think this conversation we're having is so important. If you guys have all been keeping up with our coverage this semester, a few things have happened with the university's administration, and also from a perspective of the sports, the University Athletic Association, in terms of trying to restrict First Amendment rights of not only ourselves, but their own faculty, in terms of barring their own professors from testifying in court, things like that. And our coverage of that has been extensive. We might not be breaking the news like some of like the strong, like the bigger outlets like the Chronicle of Higher Education, but we are in depth and, you know, in their offices trying to get them to talk, you know, things like that. So, and that's not possible unless we are independent from the university. I'm not sure if anyone read the editorial we ran in Monday's paper. It was scathing because of the things that we've had to deal with this semester, and that editorial does not happen if we're under the purview of the university. And in terms of like coverage we've done this semester, and with the sports sections, we investigated claims of abuse under the former women's basketball coach, and now the University Athletic Association is its own entity and they operate very differently, but these attacks on our First Amendment rights as the press are still very much under attack today. It's been one of the unique challenges actually.
And Stephen, all I'll say is, you know, the three of us are a lot older than you and your colleagues at the paper, but in our lifetimes, there's never been a more dangerously divided political time. When I think back on my life, and after 9/11, urban, rural, Black, white, Hispanic, Democrat, Republican, we were plunged into a patriotic state that we haven't experienced since because of a common threat to us. And it's just a shame that COVID has become a political divide, how to handle it. And everything else in politics is the demonizing of your adversary who need not be your enemy. So I think we're in a really fragile and dangerous time politically. Every issue is overly politicized, and it makes the free press more important than ever, notwithstanding the attacks on it.
Absolutely. And one of those things that being independent is great. We do have a budget. And one thing I will say is one of the things that have been great is we still pay our people, and we're not like a student newsroom that doesn't, you know, that is volunteer based, where we love that. So if you guys you know, enjoyed today's discussion, enjoying our coverage of the university still as it continues, and to help strengthen and build the legacy that we have, at the top of the alligator.org website is a donate button. If you want to click that and help donate, you can help keep our newsroom running, because we are down to one print a week, which, as you mentioned, Professor Foley, has had its, you know, unintended effects of helping us do more enterprise content, but that also means less ads and stuff. So I'll just throw that plug in there.
I would hope that the relatively new dean at the College of Journalism gets an opportunity to connect with the Alligator team, notwithstanding the wonderful work Fresh Take Florida is doing. My firm is a sponsor of a little bit of Fresh Take's work, but I'm going to be a lifetime supporter of the Alligator, and I hope that there's overlap and cooperation and collegiality there, because the Alligator is so important, its history and its future, to the well-being of that region and our state.
You bet.
Absolutely. Sean, did you want to say something, or are we just wrapping up?
That'll be it. Just wanted to thank everybody for attending. Thank you so much, Professor Foley, Ron, Jean, Stephen. It's really appreciated. Thank you for attending. This has been terrific. I've loved every minute of this. Thank you for everybody participating. Thank you for everybody who joined us. I sincerely appreciate it.
And by the way, 50 years, it's unbelievable. Time flies.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about it.
All right.
Everybody,
Thank you,
happy
everyone.
holidays. God bless. Stay safe. Thanks for the privilege of being a part of this.
Thank you, Ron.